Hey, remember this. We are one day closer to getting out of lockdown. One day closer. I am so looking forward to it. We're looking for Mark Blackburn this morning. There he is, top of the list. Coming in, he's coming in. Hello, Mark, top of the morning.
Hey, Andrew, how are you, buddy?
Good, good. How's it going?
Awesome. Fantastic. I'm looking forward to another week of lockdown and how come we can be creative as coaches to help our people. And yeah, it's going to be fun.
I like that you said that. I'm looking forward to another week of, I think I'm finally getting to the point where this can seem enjoyable, where it
Yeah.
can seem productive, and I've got my little system, my schedule, my daily routine down, and we're getting going. So it's certainly feeling better. As I
Yeah.
said to you earlier, I think what's going to happen is as soon as I get dialed into this process, we're going to switch again. But I'm okay with that too.
Yeah, no, I think that we're all kind of adjusting, and we, like anything, once you figure out the new normal, then the normal is going to change again, and we're going to go back to another type of normal, whatever that may be. And I'm looking at, look, embrace the uncertainty of it and look at it as an opportunity. And I think there's lots of positives that are going to come out of all of this. Obviously, people dying is terrible, but
Yeah.
the time you get with your family, the time you get to do some things that you probably wouldn't. I mean, I like the fact that I can actually look and learn and get into stuff that I don't typically have time to with my crazy travel schedule.
I'm with you 100%. It has been pretty cool in a couple of different ways. Obviously, for those people who are being tragically affected by this, that's a little different angle. But for those of us who are fortunate to be able to avoid the virus, and pretty much because we're staying away from people, we can actually make some positive gains on it.
Yeah, and absolutely. It's an opportunity to, like, a mini off season, if you like, where you don't actually have to teach many people apart from remotely, so you can actually get on and do bits and bobs. So yeah, and I like to be able to see my family. And my wife said to me, I don't think since we've been married that you've spent this much time at home. So it's kind of fun. I mean,
Yeah.
again, it's sad in a lot of ways in the bad part, but I always tell people there are some advantages to living in the South. People tend to make fun of us, but when it's a little bit more spread out, a little bit less densely populated, there are some advantages.
It's a different deal. Hey, it's a different deal. So, Mark, I've got to tell you, your accent is somewhat similar to mine.
Yeah.
It's not the same, but it's similar in that it's rather mixed up. And
Yep.
when I go to South Africa, my friends say, "Oh, you sound American," and when I come to America, my friends say, "Oh, you sound South African." And I think I'm somewhere in the middle. How did you get to America and get to doing what you do?
Yeah, so they say the same to me. Mine now is, are you Australian or South African? So when I go to England, they'd say that to me. So um, I came to the States to play college golf in 1994, and I played at a school in Mobile, a Baptist school, and then I got recruited and graduated and finished up playing at Southern Miss. So
Okay.
I wasn't, I would say, a great college golfer by any means, but I was fairly determined that I was going to try and play golf for a living. Thankfully, the level of play wasn't probably quite as deep back then as in the sort of 2000, 99, 98, 99,
Yeah.
as it is now. Otherwise, I certainly probably wouldn't have ended up where I did. So everything happens for a reason. So I then played for a little bit. And while I was playing, I basically was trying to subsidize playing with teaching. So I probably started teaching in 98. And then I was playing a little bit, played the Hooters Tour. And then I just never really got consistent enough to play well. I played well at times.
Yeah.
And then I got a wrist injury. I was in England. I was about to go to Q School. I was actually playing really nicely, and I hit a shot on the 12th hole at the club I grew up in England, and my wrist blew up. And I was like, okay, well, I can't play golf for a while. So I went back to doing some teaching. And then essentially I was at a really rural club in North Alabama called Gunner's Landing, and I would just go out there with a video camera, and 30-minute lesson, I'd still be out there with the person 3 hours later, and the head pro would be shaking his head going, what are you doing? And I just kind of created this sort of love affair with enjoying figuring things out. Like, how did it work? Why? As a kid, I used to take things apart and then try and put them back together. Didn't always succeed. So I always liked like the components of something, and that kind of where the teaching part started. And then I was starting to have a little bit of success with terrible golfers were getting better. And the good thing was there were people that really hadn't played much golf. So it was kind of an organic development of their golf games and my teaching skills. Yeah. And the cool thing was, as I was still trying to fund playing, I was playing in events, section events, like different things. I would try out the information I was learning, and then I would go see other instructors and I would try and get information. Did it work? How could I apply it? And then really it was trial and error. So it was kind of this, if you like, laboratory of trying different things. And it was the only technology you had those days was video cameras. So I was so excited when I got my first camera, right? So everything was a little subjective. You'd see one teacher and they tell you one thing, and then you'd see another teacher and it'd be the complete opposite. And you're like, wow, well, they're both really successful. How does that happen? Yeah. And then so you were trying to simulate your own ideas. I kind of got involved with the golfing machine early. And so I had a lot of mentors in that, and they would teach different things on the West Coast and they taught on the East Coast, and it was all out this one book, and there was these different variations, which was interesting. Yeah. And I kind of basically ended up stopping playing. The guy that was kind of helping me said, look, I'm not going to fund you to play golf anymore, but I watch what you do with all this teaching, and all these people get better and you seem to really enjoy it, and it's doing things for our club. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to help fund you do some teaching and get in the PGA of America and pay for all. That was cool. So yeah, so I kind of went that route, and then I just became this guy that would play in section events, assistant, and all I'd ever do was looking at golf swings. And I kind of was very fortunate because a lot of guys would ask questions, and I was the young kid that was playing pretty competitively, like in events, section events, and then I would get questions and I was teaching. So it was kind of the playing and teaching route in the PGA, and it worked out really well for me. And I had lots of different sort of influences along the way, and then that's kind of how I got going. And then I had some of the relationships I had from playing on the Hooters Tour. Guys were playing on the PGA Tour by then, and I'd been doing this for a few years, and some of them were struggling, and they were like, well, you can still play golf and you can kind of teach. Well, that might be useful versus me getting lessons from someone who can't really play golf. And that's kind of how I started. And I got very lucky with one of my best friends, Heath Slocum, in 2004 in New Orleans. I think it was 04, maybe in 05 in New Orleans. He was struggling with his golf game. He said, could you come drive down to New Orleans and help me with my golf game? Yeah. So I did. And then that's kind of how I started teaching tour players. Like it just started from there, and then things escalated. And in our world, it's as much as who you know versus what you know, right? In the right place. At that time, I probably had this much information, but it was the right information for Heath at the right time. And he went on and he played great and he won that year. And that kind of started my snowball of getting more credibility. But I think the other thing that was important was it gave me funding to go see other people. I can still remember the first time he ever wrote me a check, and I was like, oh my goodness. I showed it to my wife. I was like, that's the biggest check I've ever seen, like written to me personally. Yeah. And that was I was living in the middle of nowhere, not extravagant. So it was a lot of money, and it could go a long way to go see other people, go get it more and more information. And that's kind of how I started. And I just kind of grew it from there over time. And then you add more players, and then different things happen. You get different relationships. And I always said, if you do a good job with people, not just tour players, but like club golfers too. So I was really into building juniors, people like the average golfer that was terrible, big hooks, big slices, and then getting them to hit better shots. You know how it is in smaller communities, that kind of spreads word of mouth. And then there's that guy with a crazy voice. He's really good at fixing slices. So it kind of grew from there. And so I had both ends of the spectrum. I kind of had complete beginners, and then I had some of the best players in the world. And then you kind of get the whole gamut in between all of it. So, and that's kind of still how I do it. I mean, I teach here at Greystone. I've got a great team of 6 coaches, and we teach complete beginners, and we teach some of the best players in the world. So
That's awesome.
that's kind of the cliff notes of
Yeah,
how I got there. And then there's other probably pretty poignant moments along the way and certain influences that kind of have done different things to my teaching. But I think that that's kind of how I got there. I mean, a little playing background, which helped, but
yeah,
then, you know, teaching people in the trenches, there's no substitute for teaching lots and lots of bad golf lessons.
yeah.
I think it really helps you with the best players because you can make quick changes and you can help people on the fly. Whereas if you've never taught bad players, you don't have necessarily that skill set to fix a slice or a big hook. And I tell everyone, golfers are all the same. A golf swing falls somewhere between a big hook and a big slice. Like it's
Mm,
somewhere in there, regardless of the skill level. And you're
yeah,
trying to give them the ingredients they're missing to help them hit the shot they want to hit.
yeah. And like Chuck Cook says to me, and I really love Chuck, and he's always got some great nuggets, but he says, as golf coaches, we're pretty much neutralizers. Someone comes in there slicing, you try to get them to hit a little draw. Someone comes in there hooking, you try to get them to hit a little fade. We're always working to get them from those two extremes somewhere closer to the middle.
Yeah, 100%. Chuck's been a big influence to me. He's great. Lane Savoy, that's one of his proteges, now works with me here in Birmingham, and Chuck's awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I think that pragmatic approach, that's where I would probably put myself. I would say I'm very pragmatic in, look, what's the issue? And I think that comes from being English, right? Okay, here's your problem. Here's the solution. Here's how we're going to go fix it. I'm not necessarily going to use a bunch of big words and use a bunch of fluff. I'm just like, okay, here's the issue. This is what we need to do. Because I've found over the years that good players, especially when you get to that, that's what they want. They want a solution, and they want somebody that's confident that is going to give them a plan to be able to do it. And then that also works really well for the club golfer too, because they come through your door and they're just like totally distraught about their golf game. And it's like, if you give them this, look, it's going to be fine. It's good. Like, here's what we're going to do. Here's what's happened. Here's your treatment plan. Do this. And then the joy that they have once they're like, oh man, they're so excited. And the best thing about them is that the score is less relevant. A good player is all about score.
Yes.
A club golfer, yes, it's about score, but they're just excited about hitting good golf shots. So if you give them more good golf shots, you'll see them around the club, or they'll drive down to the teacher. Man, I hit it so good today on these holes. So fun.
Yeah.
And that's what you're trying to do. Whereas a tour player, there might be like 90% good, and then there's a few bad shots, and it's completely different animal.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's where I wanted to go, Mark. There's obviously a tremendous difference between the manner in which you approach somebody who's top tier, highly competitive already, looking to get that extra ounce out of their game, versus that 15 handicapper coming in the door saying, help me hit better shots.
Yeah.
What's your thought on that?
Yeah, they're totally different animals, right? I think you can, with the 15 handicapper, invariably, they don't really have great understandings of what they're trying to do most of the time. A lot of 15 handicappers just they're either I'd say there's two populations of 15 handicappers, and there's a generalization, but you've either got guys that are pretty good athletes who really have no concept of what's going on, but they can put the club on the ball. Yeah. And then you've got the complete golf geeks that don't really have any athletic ability like this other population, but they're just full what I call golf nerds, right? And I love golf nerds because they're big clients, and so
they do the stats and they work on their short game. They do everything right, and they're getting a lot out of their game perhaps already.
100%. They're like towards the capacity of their skill set, just based on they are totally immersed in it. So for them, you're trying to, okay, well, what's your goal? What's your shot? I always ask people, I try and be like, what's your shot you want to hit? Okay, do you have all the ingredients that are going to allow you to do that? Okay, so ball striking's one piece. Now let's look at your short game. Now let's look at your putting. Now let's look at your tactical and strategical approach. And sometimes a lot of people can't see the forest through the trees, and they're doing all these things, but then their application on the golf course, you go watch them play, which I'm a big proponent of. Their concept of like simple strategy, tacticals is not very good. So you're like, they don't really know how to play the game. They might have all these different skill sets, that they work on, but they don't necessarily know the art of scoring. So you try and figure that out. And then these guys that are pretty good athletes, the 15 handicappers, well, a lot of times they lack some of those sort of finesse type skills. Most of the time they're good athletes, pretty good ball hitters, and they got the touch of a stonemason. I mean, it's like, so you're trying to nurture what's the pieces that they need to score better. But it's always fun, and they're different. The best thing about club golfers is the completely different personality, whereas tour players, ultra competitive, they tend to have the really, really good ones, somewhat narcissistical. It's not a bad thing. It's an essential, you know.
So. Yeah.
So it's just different. And I like the variability of it. I like going from a tour event and then coming back and then working with our club golfers. And that's the one thing that's been fun about this whole sort of environment we're in now, is I get the opportunity to have a lot more interaction. We do a lot of free Zoom clinics and things for our members. It's kind of fun to get an idea of kind of the things that make them tick. And then when they send the emails and the text messages, man, I got to play at the weekend. Thankfully we're open. People can play. Guys and ladies, they're really excited about the game. So it's good. You can have a really big impact quickly, I think, on a club golfer. Let's say any club golfer, your impact can be massive, because they're not necessarily trying to do the same thing every time. It's a different, because their margin for error is greater, and there isn't quite the sort of, if you like, pressure in the environment. Whereas a tour player, you can have the right information, but if it doesn't resonate and it doesn't go to them, all of a sudden there's not going to be a really big, quick, impactful change. And that would be the biggest thing. Tour players can do what you want them to. So you better have the right information, but you also better have the right messaging. Whereas club golfers, you can have the right information and the messaging can be a little bit more general, and you can throw more stuff up on the wall, more analogies, more metaphors to make it work. And they don't know any different. But the tour player, now it's like, anytime there's gray with a tour player, all of a sudden you kind of lose them. And it's unique. That's a different relationship and a different set of skills that you need versus the club golfer. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are, but that's kind of the way I see the club golfer as a lot more, it's a lot different, but it's also requires a lot more creativity on some facets, because some of the issues they have are just so obscure versus a good player.
Yeah. The club golfer, I think, it's easier to make headway with the club golfer. It's easier to get the club golfer in the space of that 1 hour you're invariably going to spend with them, to get them happy and to get them smiling and to get them leave feeling like, this is awesome, I can't wait to go out and play the next day. A tour player, you could spend a whole day with them and you're going to have a hard time getting them really happy and really pumped to go out and play the next day.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that the good of a tour player is so good anyway, that their expectation of making good great or like incredible is just hard to satisfy. You can do it, but in short windows, right? And that's why most tour players make all their money in a 6 to 8 week window. Everybody looks at Tiger Woods 2000. Well, you might as well put that in the closet, because that's just not the real world. The majority of tour players, short periods. So when they're on, they're on. The club golfer it's totally different. They just get joy and excitement out of hitting good shots. You know that expression, well, hit a good one and it'll bring you back. Well, it really does. And their incitement of getting back into it. And the other thing that I really enjoy about club golfers is the community aspect. It's very tribal, right? Like everybody gets together. Like I played with our members in my own cart. I live on the golf course, but we played on Saturday, and I just enjoy this aspect of it's very much the whole group that plays together. There might be 20 players playing in groups of 4 or 5, but afterwards, and everyone's excited about playing together. It's a totally different atmosphere. That rarely happens on PGA Tour. I can tell you, depending which player I'm with, who we're going to sit with if we go have lunch, or it's not the same. Now, it's cool to see Ricky, Justin Thomas, Smiley Kaufman, those guys kind of get together, but it's different. Whereas club golfers, it's much more about the community of us all getting together and kind of like enjoying that environment. And I think that's one of the things that's really cool. Like when you do a golf school, I enjoy that, getting to meet different people, those interactions and seeing how people are, and golf being, if you like, the currency that brings everybody together. I think that's really enjoyable as a coach. And if you're in the golf business, like you're in the people business, and that's kind of fun to me.
Totally, totally. I love that. That's one of the big reasons I do, particularly in the spring, not so much this year, but in the springtime, I do 6-person golf schools, and I've got somebody who works with me. And it's just something that I look forward to all year long, because we've got this tribe of happy golfers who are all going to jump in the river to get better and get swept away in the same direction. So it really is a nice time and a nice 3 days where everyone's so all in, you know?
Yeah, totally. And they're willing, because there's no career on the line, or there isn't quite the sacrifice necessary. They're willing to be completely vulnerable, and they're like, so the ability for them to get better is a lot easier for them, because they're not giving anything up. They're already not very good, relatively speaking. So they embrace that. Oh, okay, well, if I keep doing what I've been doing, obviously I'm not going to get better. Well, I'll try this, and I'll do what you suggest. And that's the good thing. If a student's receptive to what you want them to do, that makes our job way easier. I think when some of the skills is like trying to bring somebody out of themselves if they're not, and that becomes a little bit more difficult. And that's just the nature of some players. And I think as players get better, and I get a lot of kids that come in that are really good, the personality is slightly different, right? Some of them tend to be quite internal, and just because golf's a pretty lonely game in the junior ranks, right? They play together, but so it's a different. So a lot of times you're trying to teach those people a little differently. It takes a little bit more of a skill to open them up, get them to smile, do all those, build their confidence up. So it's just different. I guess the best part about coaching an array of golfers is you get an array of personalities and traits, and then that makes you better as a coach, because I always look at the ones I find difficult. I look at that as a challenge if I'm bound and determined to win this person over and to help them be better, because I can use that in a different situation down the road, you know, when I need it in perhaps a more difficult environment.
Yeah. And Mark, you've been with TPI for a long time. You play a big role with TPI. How did that start? How did you get involved with TPI? And once you've answered that, I got a couple other TPI questions for you. So I like this.
Okay, so in 2007, I was at Southern Hills at the PGA Championship, and I got a phone call from a tall Swedish player called Robert Carlson, and I get this Swedish guy on the phone. Hello, is this Mark? Yeah. I would like you to help me with my golf game. I'm like, well, this is interesting. So I said to Heath, who I was there with, I said, tall Swedish guy, European Tour legend, wants me to help him with his golf game. I don't know how this has happened, but do you mind? So he goes, no. So anyway, I end up helping Robert. And then Robert asks me if I would go to TPI with him in the sort of October of 2007. So I go to TPI. I already knew Dave and Greg. My college background was exercise science and coaching, just to preface this. So, and then with the golf machine and Mac O'Grady, I spent time with, like, you kind of had the sort of patterns and different movements and blah, blah, blah. So when I went with Robert, Dave and Greg, and we did some 3D, all of a sudden it was like, okay, wait a minute, there's the missing piece. There's all these ideas, but now we have a way to measure it. And your movement pattern, so he can't do this. That's why he does this in his golf swing. So I was fortunate with Robert. I had the right information at the right time. Yeah. That's the only reason that it kind of worked, right? So, and he went on in 2008. He was then arguably the best player in the world that year besides Tiger. He finished top 10 in all the majors. So great. It was one of those things where the information from TPI was powerful. So Dave and Greg were like, hey, you're teaching tour players. We'd like you to become more involved with what we do. We see that there's an authenticity about the way you go about your business, but you also, with your background, and you've got players using our information, hey, we'd like you to start being involved with our seminars. Would you be interested in, like, potentially presenting some of them? And that's kind of how it started. It was the fact that I had the authenticity piece of teaching players with the information. And then it kind of started from there. And then with Jason Glass, Lance Gill, Dave Phillips, and Greg, essentially now I've been all over the world presenting those seminars. And people ask me, well, why do you present someone else's information? I always say, well, it's not really someone else's information. It's just movement screening. So movement screening is a great tool for us as coaches so that we can determine what somebody does. Now, some of the things I now know is, yeah, you can have a movement screen, but then force application and the kinetics of movement are going to kind of sometimes trump a movement pattern, because there's plenty of guys who don't screen very well, that are on TV, that make millions, that don't have swing faults that you might think they would based on how they move, because they've got great force application. So the TPI thing has been really helpful, especially for our club golfers. And the reason I say this is because for the average golfer that doesn't move particularly well, a lot of times they've opened up a golf magazine or a golf digest, and articles you or I may have written are right, but they're not necessarily right for that person, and yet they're trying to do them and they're really frustrated. So once you can screen them and make them realize, listen, there's a reason you can't do that. It's because your body can't do it. So don't try that. It's okay. You give them an excuse. You give them kind of a crutch to where now all of a sudden they become a little bit more, oh, okay, now I understand. So I can do this, and this is why you do that. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. We just need the ingredients that go along with that to make that work for you. And you get away from the stylistic part of what the golf swing is, right? And so I think that's where the movement part is really powerful, is understanding for the average golfer, this is what you do, this is why you do it. Now, we have the opportunity here. We can teach around it. It's the real world. Or, hey, guess what? We can go to the gym. We can get you with our fitness team, and you can work on improving some of these limitations so that you move better. Then we have a chance to make your golf swing look different. Some people choose that, but very few of them. The reality is you're chipping away at people and making them understand this is your, if you like, tendency, and we're trying to manage that. And here's the pieces that go along with that. So for some people, they might need a really strong grip, or they might need a really weak grip. They might do certain things that you have to accommodate that. I think the one thing that is useful is understanding stuff like forces and torques, ground forces, 3D, like some of those other things, to where you can, something that stylistically, let's say when you and I probably grew up in the lead days, where you need to do this and you need to do that and you have to do this. Well, we now know that that's not necessarily bad, but you don't have to do that. And some of the idiosyncrasies are actually what make people really good. And as long as you have the pieces that go with it, now you're good to go and you can play golf. And I think that's everybody's different, right? Good players, you tend to work on address, backswing to let the downswing happen. Bad golfers, you sometimes work on stuff that you wouldn't work on with a really good player, because they have no concept of how to control it. So you match all these pieces up. So for TPI, I always find people say, oh, you're a TPI guy. No, I'm passionate about sharing movement screening with people, because I think it's a really important tool for a golf coach to have. That's why I still do the things, and we have a great time, and you get to interact with a lot of people, like 120 to 200 people once a month all over the world. It's fun. It's taking me to some great countries. I've got some great relationships out of it, and it's fun to share and see people's passion. So we're trying to grow the game. The more people that get access to better information, I think it's a good thing.
Totally. I do too. I know that in the early days, golfers, the everyday golfer, was under the impression, I'm not sure how it happened, but they got under the impression if they went to a TPI trainer, and that trainer, TPI certified trainer, and that trainer gave them stuff to work on, that they were going to get longer. And it was kind of a little bit of a joke, in that people didn't get longer. They might become more flexible. They definitely got a little stronger. They could be more stable in their golf swing. They must probably hit the ball a little better. But a lot of golfers would go into it under the false impression that I'm doing this workout plan to get longer. And it wasn't. I know certainly with super speed sticks and Dr. House and all of that stuff, we've got better information now as to how to be more direct when it comes to getting longer. But I noticed that, and it was quite a while ago, that people would go and get under this impression, I'm going to get longer. I'm working with a TPI trainer.
Yeah, I think that people's perception is that they're going to move better, and then all of a sudden they're going to hit it further. And you got to remember, like, there's a hierarchy. So the TPI screen is very dominant on how your mobility and stability model works, like the way your body works. So your foot's stable, your ankle's mobile, your knees stable, hips mobile, and so on. And so if you have an injury, sometimes joints take on the wrong characteristics. So all of a sudden, let's say you got a tight hip. Well, either your lower back, that's the lumbar that's designed to be stable, that becomes mobile, or your knee will start moving in a multi-directional way like the hip should, and now you have an injury. So the whole premise of the sort of initial part of TPI is to make you more functional. Then you have the potential to train to hit it further. But just doing mobility, stability work isn't going to make you hit it further. Now, overload, underload, Olympic lifting, those type things, that makes you more explosive, more dynamic, makes you more rotary ballistic. Those things can, but I think, again, things get lost in translation, right? Some people would hit it further if they just did something and got up off the couch, like some type of activity. But there is force production itself required some different things. And to your point, super speed's great, Tom House is great, but what we know now is there's some different variables that are essential and characteristics that are common amongst long hitters. And those are the things that make you hit it further, because you can take someone that has essentially not done any training, and I can take them and I can make them hit it further. That's not that hard. It's almost like a parlor trick. If you do certain things, you will hit it further. So I think that early on, people had the misconception of that. I think people may still have that misconception. Just because you get in better shape, it doesn't mean that you're going to hit it further. In fact, sometimes if you get in better shape and lose 30 pounds and you have less mass, well, force is mass times acceleration. You may not be able to generate as much force. Now you might hit it shorter, but you're in better shape and you're going to live 20 years longer.
Yeah.
So,
and that was certainly the idea for so many golfers. It was, I'm getting in shape. I'm now going to hit it longer. And you know, after a couple months, they'd go, what's happening here? I'm not any longer. I'm not any longer. And now we know it's actually, like you said, it actually is quite easy to get people to get their club head moving faster. If they hit it out the center of the face, they're going to hit it longer. It's as a coach with this modern day radar, because I know when you got started, you didn't have a TrackMan or a Flight Scope or a Foresight.
No.
That would have been so cool to have that throughout your whole career. But it is nice to get it in this part of our career where we can quantify, hey, look, you hit that one 23 yards further.
Yeah, and I think to your point, the good thing is, and this goes back to our initial part, and I always tell young instructors this all the time. Sometimes in those early years, teaching without anything other than a video camera, and sometimes no video camera, you had to create results, and the ball doesn't really lie. Like if you want it to draw, you want it to fade, you want it to go high, you want it to go low. Creating those outcomes without any technology makes you have to kind of do some of the work yourself. The radars are great, but even research shows you that 1 out of 10 shots is a completely not accurate. And I mean, without bastardizing anybody, they're not always right. So I think that the technology now is great because we get to see the different things that we've tried over the years. Oh, that's what that does. And that's what well, that's why that happens. And okay. So I think it's really good. But I always tell, and our younger coaches at the academy, I'm like, you don't need, this is not to be on all the time. Like get it a baseline, but then go see what you can do. Because if you continually are using it for feedback to validate what you're doing, you're never going to make any progress. But it is cool to have it all now. I mean, they've got more technology that's like going to NASA when you come into my bay, but I find myself using it, and then, okay, now we'll go work on what we need to work on. And the funny part is when you work with the best players in the world, you don't have that on the PGA Tour. You got what I'm talking to you on now. You got an iPhone.
Yeah.
You have a TrackMan, but you're not taking it on the course, and you spend more time coaching on the golf course situationally. What are they doing to try and play the golf course to play well in the tournament that week is
Yeah.
what you do on tour. So it's kind of funny. The technology's great, and to have it's amazing as validation, but it needs to be sprinkled and not overused, because golf's a game to be played, right? It's about scoring, and there's no machine that does that for you.
Yeah, yeah. I like what you said. It definitely helps with our understanding, and I can see how that worked now, because it always worked, but I didn't really know why it worked. Now I can see why it works, and just get that better understanding. True.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it also helps to know, well, that's why I screwed that up. I mean, I tell everyone failures and screwing stuff up has been some of my best successes, because it's like, dang it, I can't believe that. And then, you get around players that got a lot more wisdom, that are smart, and they'll be like, well, you could just do that. Or you could just do that. And I'm like, why didn't I think of that? So.
True. Mark, you mentioned young coaches. I know there's a bunch of coaches watching in, and I suspect quite a large percentage of them are younger. What would your advice be to a young coach getting started in this information-rich world that we live in now? I know when we got started, it was, bust out the old VHS tape and watch that, or read a book if you could find one. It's very different now. What would you say?
Yeah, I think the wonderful thing now, and I've actually gotten a chance to look at some of this in the last month or so, is online is essentially just like this open for anybody, wild west of information. So you can find information, but I think you've got to balance it with the practical application. There's no substitute. So for a young teacher, I use this a lot. I say that you can make a lot of money teaching golf if you can be good at teaching two lessons. One is, can you teach someone to hook the snot out of it, and can you teach someone to slice the heck out of it? Because to my point earlier, everything is a rendition of that. And if you're teaching the average golfer, the majority are probably going to come to you and they're slicing it and they'd love to hook it. So if you know how to teach a hook, it's really easy to put those ingredients in that they're missing to allow them to hook it. And if they've got a duck hook, you just need to give them the pieces that are slice orientated. Now that's just moving the needle, but essentially for the average golfer, they're going to be joyed with that, because you can change and you can have a big impact. So there's no substitute for teaching a volume of lessons. So regardless of what you do, the 10,000 hour rule doesn't really exist, but let's just use it as if you've taught 10,000 hours or a lot of volume of golf lessons, you've seen a lot of bad stuff, but you've seen a lot of good stuff. You know what works. You start to see patterning. You start to identify, if you like, traits and characteristics that produce good things. Now I think that's massively important. So I tell everyone, go find somewhere that you can teach a volume of lessons. Don't expect to charge a bunch of money initially, but teach lots of people, so that you start to see what people need and what people don't need, and then what works, what's impactful, what isn't. And then here's the really cool thing about bad golfers. They're so bad that you can't really mess them up that badly anyway. You've got a margin for error, and you can circle through a few different things until you get it right. Whereas a good player, if you don't tell them something that's impactful very quickly, you've lost them and your credibility is gone. So I tell young teachers, take all the research, the information on the internet, take launch monitors, take 3D, take force plates. It's all great. The technology is only great if you really understand how to translate what comes out of it and apply it. So you need to be cautious, because it's still a human interaction working with golfers. You get the most experience by teaching a lot of volume, starting with bad golfers. And if you get to better golfers before you know what you're doing, oh, that guy doesn't know what girls, they're useless, they're terrible, they're not very good. Well, it's just because you haven't had any experience in that environment, so you're not comfortable with it, and you're not just going to automatically react and adapt to different things and look at it as, oh, that's fine, I've been there, it's not a big deal. That's what I tell everybody. It's like would you go have surgery from somebody that's, doing their in medical school, or would you go have a fellow that's been out for, 15 years? Well, we know the answer.
Yeah.
So that's the tough part, is if you want to be better and you want to learn, see one, do one, teach one's a medical model where you got to teach and do a lot of it. And the volume of it's really, really important. So you start to train yourself to be able to understand, okay, well, that's going to produce this, that should produce this. I've seen this, I've seen that. What did I do there? Oh, and that would be my advice, which isn't necessarily what everyone wants to hear, because they think, oh, that's pretty difficult. And I'm like, well, yeah, if you want to be good at something, it takes a lot of time and effort to get accomplished, so that you can have that good eye, right? That good coaches have.
Yeah. It really is a case of get out there, make mistakes, practice, get pushed into corners by different personalities and different golf swings, figure your way out. And once you've got that, I think with the internet, it's a tremendous resource for knowledge. And when you're in the trenches, as you said earlier, now you learn how to best apply that knowledge, because knowledge on its own is really not much when it comes to being a golf coach.
Couldn't agree more. And I think that the more time you can spend around people and mentors that will show you the application, explain why they're prescribing something and why they're doing it, and the framework that I always find frameworks are very useful. So how does Andrew teach? What's the framework that Andrew Rice uses for a lesson? That's a powerful tool to share with other instructors. How does Butch Harmon give a golf lesson? How does Chuck Cook give, how do they look at things? Because a system is scalable. So as a coach, I think our job is for us all to develop a system, not as in preferences of style, but just, okay, well, how do we approach this? What's a way to do it? And I think the more that you can get the application part of it, someone comes to shadow you and watches you at Savannah Harbor and you're doing your thing, how do you go about it? And then that question and answer is really important, because that's how you transfer information. And if you look at generally how before the internet, golf instructors came to be known as great, is it was very much an apprenticeship based sort of system where you would go, if you were a club where there was a good teacher and you worked under that teacher and then you went out on your own, now you may have had the lens of that teacher, so you kind of taught what they taught, but at least you had somebody showing you the way to go about it and the way to look at things. That's what's needed now, because the internet doesn't really do that for you, because there isn't enough of hands-on mentoring. And I think that's what people should really try and find, is coaches are willing to help. Like young folks teachers come watch all the time, and I try and explain to them why I'm doing what I'm doing. So because if they're there, I feel like they want the information. And I think people are willing to share. I think as a community, golf coaches are really good at sharing.
I think it's much better, hey? I think it's much better than it used to be. I think the internet has helped that a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot more transparency. And the thing is, now we really don't have any secrets, because objectively, if somebody thinks they've got the secret sauce and you measure it and it's not what they say it is, it's like, well, it's just fortunate for them that it kind of works. So the good thing about all of the technology is it keeps you objective and it keeps everyone honest. So if someone's, doesn't really know what they're doing, but they've got a player that can just kind of do it, it exposes you. So I think everyone's willing to share, because we really can't keep secrets from each other anymore. There is no holy grail. We have certain individuals all over the place always think they've got this secret, but when it totally doesn't align with the scientific golf community, then you have to question and go, well, how are all these PhDs that are great, how do they not agree with something, but yet this person, a lot of times it's because somebody's not necessarily understanding what's going on. So it's really interesting. If it adheres to scientific principles and it's got applicable, proof, I'm like, well, that's pretty good. I'm going to listen to it. I'm going to go listen to that person. Even if I don't like them, I'm still going to listen, because it's an opportunity to learn. For sure.
And Mark, we've spoken a lot about coaches here. What have you got? I know there's a bunch of golfers tuned in here too. What would you say, and we're talking to our 15 handicap everyday golfer, what would you say are things that golfers can do? And I'm gonna look forward, and I'm going to go, when we get out of this lockdown, what do you think, if you just, I often, you mentioned writing articles for magazines. I often think that writing an article for a magazine is like sending out a weather report for the entire country and going, today it's going to be 75 degrees. You're correct in about 30% of the locations in America, but you're wrong everywhere else. What information would you share for the everyday golfer that says, this is going to cover as many of you as possible? It's not going to cover everybody, but essentially general principles that the everyday golfer, in your experience, what could they get better at?
So I definitely think that everybody should spend a large volume of time inside about 120 yards, just because it's a big contribution to their score. So even if, let's say, they're perhaps not using the optimal technique, the fact that they're actually doing some work with their wedges is going to have a big contribution to their score, because statistically speaking, there's just a lot of volume of shots from that distance, because invariably they're not always hitting the green, they're out of position. And I think that those, from a pure scoring standpoint, when you do practice, if you do hit balls, I would focus on different targets, but I'd focus on that length of distance, chipping, pitching, putting, because when you play the game, you know that you're going to have a lot of those shots. The other part I'd probably work on is trying to hit my driver better. And to your point earlier, impact location is massive. You know, so where are you hitting it on the face? And then always use the analogy, swing as hard as you want, but there's no benefit to it if you can't hit it in the middle of the face. If you can hit the middle of the face, swing as hard as you want, but only swing as hard as you can to try and get your impact location in the middle, because that centerness of hit is going to be your biggest contributor to like hitting the ball further. So between driving it off the tee and the wedge game, those to me are important for people to be able to shoot lower scores. Now, obviously, yes, we have iron shots, but if I'm trying to give people general practice information, I'm like, it's more of the focus of where you spend your time. So if you don't have a lot of time, you should probably focus it in the areas which are contributing more to your score and where you know you're going to have those shots. You can practice 7-irons all day long, but how many full 7-irons are you actually going to hit? Because understanding that you're trying to get the ball around the course, putting it in play off the tee is massive. The second shot, yeah, it's big to get it on the green and the approach, but the fact that you're going to miss a lot of greens, you should probably work on these other shots that are going to help save bogeys and keep the momentum of your score going. Sometimes they might be for pars or birdies. And that, when I play with club golf, I just start laughing at just some of the decision making and some of the shots. And to me, they're not so much, they're okay at actually making contact, but their intent and their planning is really poor.
Yeah. And, you know, you bring up some great information there, Mark. I've started using, for my own game, I got hooked up with Arcos, and I've used Arcos for the last, 11 rounds that I've played this year, which is it. What I found was I need to get better at driving. I need to increase my club speed. And I need to get better with exactly pretty much what you said, my wedge game, my chipping in particular. And the thing that struck me, when I look at, it'll tell you for 11 rounds how many shots you hit with each club. And something that really opened my eyes was I hit my driver, my 3-wood, my driver and my 3-wood in 11 rounds more than I hit all the irons in my bag added together.
Pretty interesting.
Which I think is so interesting. And that just brings another question to mind, statistics. I look at that and I go, wow, I never would have thought that. You know I need to work on driver because it's not very good. But I hit more drivers and 3-woods than all my irons put together. And that was an eye-opener for me. And I think statistics can really help a golfer pretty much do what you were alluding to there in that it'll shed light on the weaknesses and where you truly need to get better. Do you use statistics a lot with the different caliber golfers you work with, Mark?
Yeah, totally. I think that so Scott Fawcett's a buddy of mine. His decade system's great.
Yeah.
There's lots of different shot analysis type programs that you can use, shot by shot, Golf Stat Lab. Like there's an array of stats, and if people are aware of them and they understand, you know, this is what you should be doing, this is what the best players in the world do. So you comparing yourself to the ultimate performers, the 1% of the 1% on the planet, is really foolish. But it also shows you that you don't have to be perfect to score great. So the best one is driving accuracy. So driving accuracy is, depending on the course, is a very subjective stat. So on the PGA Tour, it really doesn't mean anything, unless there's a golf course that has a lot of thick rough. Strokes gained driving is such a distance biased statistic that you might as well smash it down there. And if you're somewhat in play, even if you're in the first cut, even in the rough, if you've got a shorter club, your contribution to scoring is going to be greater the closer you are to the hole, because you're going to bring it into a shorter club. So we kind of grew up in the age of technology when the head was quite small. Driver wasn't always the easiest club to hit. There was an art to driving, which makes appreciating what Jack Nicklaus and Greg Norman, guys that smashed it with older technology and hit it straight, it's really impressive. But now, so we stayed away from a driver, and it mean like 3-wood, put the ball in play a little bit more loft. We now know, obviously, easier to do that. But the reality is now the technology's made it easy. You might as well just send it and get it down there. So I tell my golfers to be aggressive, as long as you need to realize you don't have to hit the fairway. You just need to put the ball in play so that you can advance it down there. I think that's a big one. I think the other one is, you know, golfers think they got to hit all these greens. And if you look at the leaders on the tour, if you hit like 75% of your greens, you're leading. You are incredible, right? So the average golfer, like if they only hit 10 to 12 greens, that's not that bad. So again, now there's your short game. You got to be able to get it up and down. You got to be able to score. So I think the other thing that's really interesting is, so if you go strokes gained from 190 yards, if you're on the PGA Tour and you put it on the green from 190 and you two-putt, your strokes gained positive. So understanding that the contribution to scoring isn't essentially in a tournament, isn't just like a lot of birdies. It's actually these marginal gains and the compounding of it. It's a bit like the stock market. Over time, you're just trying to chip away. So stats are great at showing people you don't have to be overly aggressive. You just need to put the ball in front of you and marginalize your big miss. Like bogeys don't kill you. It's these doubles and triples, which invariably are because you've tried a shot that is really foolish, that has it's going to have a very, very low outcome, or a chance of a positive outcome. So I think those things are really good. And that's a way to really help golfers. We do stuff with our members where we take them in the trees. Like we do these small groups when we can, and we'll put them, okay, what would you do from here? And some of the things in these shots that these people see are ridiculous. And we always give them like, okay, here's the fail safe play out to your wedge distance. And then here's the aggressive shot. And here's how you would play it. Where's the trouble? What do I need to do? And a lot of times they'll try shots and they can't even hit the shot. So you're like, well, why would you ever try that? Why not chip out here? That's why we advocate working on your wedge game. And I think those things are, and when you watch good players do it, it's amazing how conservative they actually are. They're not as aggressive as you think. They're aggressive in certain places, but they're not always firing at every flag with a longer iron or a mid iron. It just doesn't happen. And I think that's, to teach people to score, the statistics are very powerful. You got to know how to interpret them, but you've also got to tailor them to the population that you're looking at and realize that, yes, golf is unique because we can use the same golf ball, we can play the same golf course and the same tees, but that's no different to me trying to run the marathon like an Olympic runner. And it's just not realistic. Or try and run the 100 dash, you know, like the Olympic champion. It doesn't happen. So golf people's perception is skewed. They got to realize that their own skill set, they need to look relative to where they're at. This is what you should be expecting to do. And I think if they do that, stats are great. If they get overly into them, sometimes it can be a paralyzer. Do you know what I mean? Because
for sure,
again,
too much.
100%. But it
for
is
sure.
interesting, to your point, things like Arcos, that you can go find yourself because it shows you how far you hit it. The other thing that I just laugh at is my members. Well, how far you got, John? I got 150. Okay, what club you hitting? Oh, I'm hitting my 7-iron. I'm like, well, your best 7-iron on the range on track, man, downwind might be 150, but you think that your best shot is now your average. And that's
Yeah.
the most amazing thing to me, is people's misunderstanding or ignorance on how far they hit the ball,
Yeah.
which is amazing.
I call it numbers. Golf is, you know, and I love in my 3-day schools to have a little chat with the group, and I call it the numbers section. We're going to talk about what your percentages are. We're going to talk about statistics. Dr. Mark Brody gave a great one on here the other day. He said from 150 yards in the middle of the fairway, PGA Tour players will average 23 feet from the flag.
Yeah.
80 shooters, 42 feet. 90 shooters, 56 feet. So if you're trying to break 90, you're going to, if you hit it inside 20 yards from the flag, you're doing well. You're doing well. And I think that helps people gain perspective. Also, that I'm a big proponent of golfers knowing their carry numbers versus their total numbers. And to your point, it's incredible how often someone will come to a golf school and I go, how far do you hit a 7-iron? Oh, 165. And I'm looking at it, I'm going, well, I swing my 7-iron 12 miles an hour faster than you, and you're hitting your 7-iron longer than I hit mine. I'm like, I don't know about that. I'm not too sure. We may have to look at that. And it's just, if golfers knew real numbers and they were accurate and we could get the ego out of it, they would all play better. That might not necessarily help them hit better shots, but it's going to help them score better. It's going to help them lower their score.
100%. And they're just going to manage their game better because they have actually a truly appreciation of how far they actually hit it.
Yes.
And they're not going to take on shots, or they're going to know what the cover is and what the carry is, and then how far the run out is. If you know those numbers and they're based on what you actually do, you can be pretty proficient. But the problem is they don't know what those numbers generally mean, and the numbers that they're applying to those are not accurate.
We have some work to do, Mark. We have some work to do to share this information with our students. Hey, Mark, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate your time. You're great. I appreciate your energy, your willingness to share. Thanks so much for everything, man. Really appreciate it. Stay safe and keep getting the good word out there.
You got it, buddy. You take care. Look forward to seeing you soon, and be safe. And hopefully we get on the other side of this and we get back on the lesson tee.
Thanks, Poz. I can't wait. I'm looking forward to it.
See you, buddy. Be safe.
Cheers.
Take care.
Thanks, Mark.
Bye. Bye-bye.